top comment and in the description is the PayPal, the Cash App, the Buy Me a Coffee, the Patreon, and the locals. The show has gone from like 5% funded by you guys for the first 6 years to the last couple months. It's gone up to like 15% funded by you guys, almost 20. That is the goal of the podcast, is to get away from the big revenue streams, Rumble, Spotify, YouTube, because those can and have in the past completely gone to zero. Case in point, last month, for no reason, Spotify dropped by 50%. That is what keeps the show going. And the thing is when most of you guys give $1 a month, that's all it needs. Some of you guys give a lot more, and that's amazing. You don't really only need to give like $1 a month. And if you're thinking, yeah, that, that it doesn't count, it really does. And I message every one of you guys that donates. It really does. That allows the show to be as vulgar and unproduced as it is, but that also allows it to be free. And I can cover topics and I don't have to worry about what does this sponsor think? What does that sponsor think? The podcast runs on $5,000 a month. Right now, it's going on about 1,500 a month just from you guys. That's 30%. I want to get it up to 100%. So then just doesn't matter what happens with the other platforms. So if you can, please do that. I genuinely track every single penny and I have for 6 years. Thank you so much. Then also, if you want something in return, Heaven's Harvest Prepper Food, use the link in the description, made in America, and Sport Drink. The sports drink. Get it, follow their Twitter. It's hilarious. They sponsor me too. Use the promo code Tommy's Podcast. Recording on Tuesday, March 3rd, 2026 at 12:05 p.m. Eastern Time with Miss Susan Kokinda and Colonel Watkins. And I can actually say, and I'm an idiot for rescheduling, but somebody said, and I think the comments last week on a show, they were like, when, no, somebody said like, please God. And I can show you this. I'm not kissing y'all's asses. It said, please God, Susan and Colonel. And I actually could proudly respond. I was like, it is happening on this day. So I don't know, that's as good as a compliment as I can give you guys, is when it's not me, when the people with brains and money who actually watch the show are like, I want those two together. That's what I do. But that's really all I really am, is I'm an Uber Eats guy. I deliver it. I didn't put it together. And that's behind the scenes. I and I told this to my mom yesterday, and I guess I'm negating that right now. I said, the less you open your mouth, the less people can be certain that you're stupid. Now I'm undoing that right now. But yeah, so I want to put you guys together. And in general, I think we both kind of talked about the same things. Colonel, the first show you and I did solo about what the big picture is, and Susan, our show last time, you had said, and you're like, the people that are so obsessed about Epstein, you're like, it is important. It's obvious and it's objective evil. But you were saying, like, I don't want to take down this. I don't want to put a band-aid on the bleeding. Sure, that is good. You were like, I want to remove the system that created that apex phenomena, whatever you want to call it. It's getting to the bottom of it. That's the doctor telling you, like, I'm not going to give you this medication. What you need to do is go to the gym. And you can take that as very hateful, or you can let your emotions settle and go, that's actually a form of tough love. But because I always start with Colonel Watkins, I'm going to hand it over to you, Ms. Kokinda, if you could please take it in any direction you'd like to.
Well, I mean, obviously, the whole world is looking at the president's actions in Iran. And I just think it's really important for people to, first of all, take this administration at face value. They're saying what they're doing. They are saying this is not regime change. Pete Hegseth said, I've lived in perpetual wars. This is not a perpetual war. This is a strategic strike against what has been for decades a fulcrum of intelligence operations that have been used by the globalists to keep the Mideast in flames and to have a larger trigger point in general. Now, what precipitated the immediate timing of this? Again, I choose to take people like Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff at face value. They said, we tried to negotiate. We offered them free enriched uranium if they want to have a civilian nuclear program. They rejected it. And at a certain point, you just pull the trigger. The other thing I would contrast taking the administration at face value in terms of why they're doing what they're doing and what they did is, let's look at the regime changers. Look at people like John Bolton. Look at Britain's Chatham House. look at, one of the people who probably has one of the most severe cases of TDS, Ann Applebaum of the Atlantic. All of them are hysterical that this is not their playbook. This is something else. Now, how is it going to play out? It's a war. I don't know. Can it go sideways? Sure, it could go sideways. Could it end up having a bad effect on the midterm elections if it goes sideways? Of course it will. But the key thing about President Trump is he's a risk taker. I think he takes the risks for the right reasons. And we're just going to have to see where this goes.
Colonel Watkins.
So I agree with everything Susan just said. I think obviously what I do is look at things historically and how these entities has manifested themselves over time, and the understanding that where we've been as far as I was kind of shocked when I started digging into the post 1980 financial ties of the EU to Iran. They continued. I mean, we're talking about what we're sold in the United States as this evil empire in Iran ran by the mullahs. But if that is true, and they're definitely evil, but if that's true, why did the EU continue through cutouts to massively trade with them? And they did. And during this entire time, if you go back and you look at the 1980 Reagan Bush administration selling missiles to them through cutouts, you just see this perpetual engagement basically on a military / intelligence use of Iran became very convenient because basically through sanctions, you're not allowed to affiliate with them. But on the underneath side of that perpetuated the CIA's. I just posted about this morning. Crypto AG, the kind of encrypted communication that was fielded all over the world, was still being used by Iran with a backdoor for the CIA to monitor everything that they were doing. So again, it almost seems, and these are my words, but it almost seems like Iran, much like the former Soviet Union, becomes this boogeyman in which all of this funding, well, if you're not trading with them, they would have a whole lot less funds, that perpetuated this radical Islamic terror, which became, after the 1990s, the new boogeyman because the Soviet Union was gone, to perpetuate this strategy of tension and perpetual chaos. And decapitating that, which is basically what we're doing right now, I agree with Susan. You have to take President Trump at face value. He is telling you exactly what we're doing, and he is piece by piece eliminating the chessboard of this behind the scenes manipulation of all of us across the world, not just the United States, not just Europe, and not just Asia, all of us collectively.
Yeah, and if you go back to President Trump's first administration and his first foreign trip, which was kind of surprising because it was to Saudi Arabia. You expect our European allies or Japan or whatever, and what did he do? He went to Saudi Arabia and he laid down the law because the Saudi support for Islamic fundamentalism was real. They had much more to do with 9/11 than poor Saddam Hussein. And he went to Saudi Arabia and he said, that's it. It's over. You are no longer going to support Islamic terrorism. So even going back that far, he was starting to take these chess pieces off the chessboard and go back even further. Of course, the mother of Islamic terrorism is the British created Muslim Brotherhood going all the way back to 1922. So, these are big moves. It's also very entrenched. But I think the important thing, as the colonel said, is don't look at it inside the immediate news cycle. Look at it from the standpoint that, the British great game always creates pawns, whether it's Muslim fundamentalism or something, or Adolf Hitler, who turned into a Frankenstein monster. And that doesn't mean you don't have Frankenstein monster situations, out of control operations that then turn around and bite you on the butt, like Hitler did. But if you pull back the curtain on all of this and you look at what President Trump is doing deliberately, to the extent he could in his first administration, and he didn't have that much of an ability because he was under attack immediately. He had a bunch of idiots in his administration, like John Bolton. Um, this administration is very different. This is his team. They are executing. I'm sure the colonel appreciates the fact that you never hear any leaks when it comes to these
Ever.
negotiations. Nothing. This is locked down tight because they are executing and they are deliberately moving step by step by step, including working with people. We've discussed this, and I'm sure you've discussed it if you've been on shows with Tom Luongo and Alex Craner. You look at Syria, you sit there and say, what is he doing working with this guy? But then you say, okay, he knows these, or Erdogan, you know, people who have been, or capabilities that have been capabilities for the British great game. He's taking those pieces away from them. Doesn't mean they've reformed, but he's taking those pieces away from them.
And I think that's a critical point. My assessment of Trump's first term was basically exposing what people like to refer to as the deep state. I call it the international syndicate, and putting the people that represent them, like John Bolton and Mike Pompeo and those people, front and center. And I think that in many ways, the leaks, which was like, kind of like a colander during his first administration, was tracing those networks and where they all ended up so that he has a complete view of the playing field for this second term. And I think that's critically important because I don't think most people, because our history is basically a total lie in the United States as far as what our government, and by government, I'm primarily focusing on the CIA, which I argue doesn't even actually work for the president in the past, has perpetuated all over the world, these regime change operations and stuff like that. So I see that Trump, and we did that in Venezuela, and John Bolton and Mike Pompeo set that up in Venezuela. I think he was highlighting for the American people this exposure operation of how these people operate. And I think for the first time during Trump's first administration, many Americans, I know certainly in my family, was like, what the heck is going on? Because it really was, because most presidents who in the past have been part of this operation, they work with the Mockingbird media and they hide all of this. It was literally what has been going on since post-World War II, front and center on every news cycle. And I think that was very revealing to prepare the battlefield for Trump's second term. And to your point about him going to the Middle East, because it wasn't just Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's Qatar. And he signed the executive order saying that if anybody attacks Qatar, it's like they're, and you see all of the neocons come out of the woodwork. Oh my gosh, Qatar's training pilots at, well, first it came out that they established a Qatari Air Force base in Idaho. And I'm like, no, we train pilots. I mean, I enlisted in 1979. I was in aircraft maintenance. We were training Jordanians and everybody else in my tech school. So we've done that obviously for a very long time. And so you can just see, I think it's, again, an exposure operation. The neocons that are out there pretending to be MAGA are the ones that like leap out with the most audacious, ridiculous assessments of everything that's going on. This most recent with Iran and the Atlantic coming out saying he doesn't know anything that he's doing. Well, just look at the board. The Atlantic Council has just about every retired CIA director that is still breathing. And they're going to tell you what the talking points are from their perspective, which literally has nothing to do with reality.
It's it's a beautiful game being played, but it's a complex game. And it's not as simple as there's evil guy headquarters. It's a big castle on a hill, and we just have to, find our balls and go fight it. It's by design. It's much more intelligent. It's an illusion of control. It's the idea that there is no mock. What are you talking? We don't have state-run media. We have blah blah blah. That's also much harder to fight against because openly, if you just start attacking these things, you're going to look like the guy going against freedom. But, you know, like there is police brutality, but in like the funniest way, like a lot of like body cams you see is when, some dude that looks like me getting drunk outside of a bar and then he gets punched in the face. You're like, he was kind of asking for it, man. Like I've been pulled over. Even if you've done nothing, you understand it's like here's a cop with a gun on the side of a highway. You're not exactly at a peaceful area. Go along, talk about it, and then at the end they're like, "Oh yeah, you're good to go." In a funny way, it's like it's actually illuminated more than any amount of anecdotal evidence ever could. It's much harder to do that, but it's how you unwind it. That's what a lot of this was, and that's the things we just said, Colonel, is like a lot of this stuff was theorized by crazy people like me that didn't go to prom and was reading Legacy of Ashes by Tim Weiner instead. I actually did that. Is like it's a lot harder to show because you have to go through these very slow. But then you look at where we are now. Everything, every from Russian collusion to COVID to a stolen election to more and more and more. It's just one by one. You're seeing these things, and it's a very long and slow process. But that's what's needed.
And one of probably the most critical factor in the whole thing is none of this would not have come out if it weren't for the courage of Donald Trump.
Correct.
Well, there's the other thing.
Right? You force it into the open because you actually fight.
Wait,
Every other previous president either capitulated to it or got shot. Ronald Reagan, it was a little bit of both. He got shot, and then,
they got in line.
increasingly he capitulated to it or really wasn't in control, especially in his second term. But that's the unique characteristic because I think it is what you said. People are experiencing it. I've talked about it for 50 years, and it was a little teeny tiny part of the population that was ready for it. And then a large part of the population goes in there, supports Donald Trump, sees all the things that happened to him, sees more happen to him, see him stand up and fight, forcing more and more of this out into the open. And I think Trump is very conscious of that. I think he recognizes the role of populations as a strategic factor. He can do more when he's got a population backing him. And that's why all this disinformation crap, inside the MAGA movement is frankly one of the most dangerous things. It's not the batshit crazy Democrats. They're a given factor, right? But it's the Tucker Carlsons and the MTGs, whatever is motivating them. The effect that it has is if he can rely less on his base, that is an actual strategic factor. But you look at it globally, a lot of people say, well, Marco Rubio was much more conciliatory toward the Europeans. I mean, frankly, I don't think he was conciliatory than J.D. Vance. I mean, I guess in comparison, the tone, was much less. Well, I think what Marco Rubio was doing, and this is, I think, the way the president functions, is he wasn't talking to the European leaders. He wasn't talking to Keir Starmer or Macron. He was talking to the people. He was basically saying, we need Europe to return to its traditions. You are a factor. Maybe you could change the direction of your country. So I think Trump, the president and his administration are always, thinking in those terms. I mean, even in terms of Israel, at one point Trump said, I'm more popular in Israel than Bibi Netanyahu. And I'm sure that's true. And he needs to become even more popular to be able to deal with that situation. But, I think he takes that into account.
So I think the first sign that everything had changed, that we weren't any longer rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, was Trump's fake news campaign. Because it started instantly. And that was kind of my signal that everything had changed. He took on
That's the most
Mockingbird.
that's the most important control mechanism.
It is.
Hmm.
And that was like, I mean, I was shocked and I knew everything had changed the day I heard him call out fake news. Because if you go back in time, back to, post World War II with the Psychological Strategy Board, this has always been an operation to control our minds.
Right.
And as soon as he pulled up that, we're in battle flag with the fake news, I was enthralled that finally we have someone that's going to take on this entire institution and dismantle it. So I think that was critical. It's like literally breaking, like the fire alarm, breaking the glass, because everything is downstream from that. It's almost impossible prior to President Trump and the fake news campaign to find real news in common. Obviously, Elon buying X has kind of kicked that into high gear. But that was just like a fundamental shift of the axis for all of us to operate under. It allows people like Susan to have much more exposure in talking about reality as opposed to what is being shoved down our throats through the Mockingbird media.
Susan?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely the case. I mean, because again, I'll just reflect on my own experience. For like 40 years, you feel like a voice in the wilderness, right? Donald Trump comes along and basically breaks the matrix, and then what you see, and we all see this in terms of the kinds of responses that we get, in the various venues and forums that we're on. People are so hungry to put the pieces together. It's like they knew it. They knew something. I mean, one of the most visceral responses I got was the show I did in response to Marco Rubio's Munich speech, where I picked up on the fact that he said deindustrialization was a conscious policy, right? It wasn't a mistake. And, my mind went back, okay, Council on Foreign Relations, 1977, the controlled disintegration of the world economy is a legitimate objective, basically, so we can destroy sovereign nations. And when I did that show, the comments that I got were this, you could just see people were saying, that's what I thought. I knew it, but you've now given voice to the fact that the horror that I've lived through this process of disintegration of the United States and other countries was not random.
No.
And that's one of the key, tools of the elites. They want people to feel helpless. It's a random world. Shit happens. I mean, certainly my generation, that's what they tried to do with us with the two Kennedy assassinations, right? You're sitting there, 14 years old, the president gets killed, crazy lone assassin, world is supposed to go on. I was campaigning for Bobby Kennedy Sr. in '68 in California when he was shot.
Oh.
And again, they try and shove it down your throat. And if you have no place to validate the fact that these were conspiracies. I had a friend who was 8 at the time JFK was shot. And he said to me, the minute I saw Jack Ruby shoot Lee Harvey Oswald, I knew it was a conspiracy and I was 8 years old. You don't have to be a rocket scientist, but you couldn't do anything about it. Nobody would validate it. Whoever was, got the early "you're crazy" treatment, like Mark Lane, who tried to expose the Kennedy assassination. And you just sort of spiral into this hopelessness. And this is what they did, certainly to my generation, because what comes in on the heels of that? The rock, drug, sex counterculture. Forget about being a productive person, thinking about the future, thinking about raising a family.
Carpe diem.
Just
turn on, tune in, drop out.
Get stoned and get screwed.
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically what they told us. And unless you have some way to begin to put the picture together, it's very hard to do as an individual. But, there's, I'd say maybe 5% of the American population kind of hung on through those years. And then Donald Trump comes along And it's like the lid blows off and people are saying, thank God, I wasn't crazy. This was deliberate. And now that it's knowable, we can do something about it.
The courage point is the most important point. Like I've seen just through this podcast. The podcast is a little over 6 years old. Right in the immediate baptism by fire was COVID. Interviewing Dr. Malone and Dr. McCullough. I was banned from YouTube for them before they ever even went on Rogan, and it was just I knew it was wrong. And getting on these doctors, and I was going up the chain of command. Like maybe this doctor thinks, and the higher I went, the worse and worse the red alarms were getting. And I was like, wait, I thought eventually one of them was going to be like, it's not that. The higher and higher to the I got the guy with the patent, and he was like, this is evil. And I was like, well, shit. And like doing that, and I knew it was wrong. And it's again, it's the courage. More them, they had a lot more to lose than me. It's the courage. And as it comes out more, now we look at it as just fact. You do have to look back at it. It's the guys that they were the beginning. It's in chemistry lab, it's called the point of nucleation. It's where you put in a little piece of metal or plastic. It's like putting a piece of ice in a cold cup of water, and then it all forms off of that. In the same way now, you have to put yourself back in 2020 and be like, think of how insane the psyops were. But if you know what you know now, and you're like, hey, the sooner everyone starts to talk about it, all the people just under the surface, they're going to nucleate to that. And then it becomes self-evident. You have to understand like that's where we are now with whatever the next thing is so if if you feel it's wrong, understand that most people around you probably also feel it's wrong, but they all think they're alone just as you think you're alone. So you have to be courageous and say something. That's the quicker, I believe, the veil will come off. And I back to the whole media, what you were saying, Colonel Watkins, is how do you make people feel lonely? Well, if you control the messaging of everything, and they go 99% of people think Donald Trump's retarded. If you're going kind of like him, you're like, I guess I'll shut up. I don't want to be, I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be
Definitely
uninvited
on
to the
purpose.
party. Yeah, Colonel.
Definitely on purpose. So the back to Susan's point about the 60s, again, psychological operations, all of it was planned. Just like what she was saying about the deindustrialization, all of it is planned. And my big kind of light bulb moment in all of this was going back and reading the Fabian Society's agenda. And you find out as early as the late 1800s, they're talking about one world government. I was shocked by that. I'd never even heard of the Fabian Society, but they talked about eugenics. They talked about, basically controlling the population and controlling people's reproduction. And then you go back and you realize that these test cases, if you will, was being done throughout the early 1900s in the United States, like with the indigenous population in America, where we were taking women and children off of Indian reservations and educating them basically in boarding schools to make them not indigenous, to make them more mainstream. So the conscious decision to break down cultural heritages across the globe. This has been done throughout the entire century of the 1900s, where we've divided, in the drawing of the boundaries after World War I and World War II, where you crossed sectionalized and grouped cultures that were basically, century old enemies of each other, because you know that you can create chaos. And then all you have to do is throw a match on the kindling anytime that you want a war, anytime that you want to create a false flag to get more money into the military industrial complex. Once you understand that so much of all of this was planned in order to bring about this one world control mechanism, it's shocking, especially for someone like me who grew up in that system and didn't know any of this existed. And that's kind of one of the things we're talking about, people's input. I have been met when we go country by country and dissect CIA operations during a regime change operation. I have had so many people that lived in that country either during it or in the immediate aftermath of it or whatever that will go, that's not how that happened. I had one lady on a Zoom call tell me that, she knew all of these people in Iran during the Mossadegh overthrow, and that there was no such thing as stay behinds in the southern part of Iran. It's documented. It's declassified in CIA documents. They did do that. There were military people in there training those people. They created the foot soldiers in order to get them out on the streets later on. And I told her, I said, look, I understand that you didn't know about this aspect of this operation. I spent 30 years in the military and had no idea most of any of this went on. So you can live. I lived in Italy for 3 years during the exposure of Operation Gladio. I didn't know it was even called Operation Gladio because they called it Years of Lead. And where I lived in the southern part, that's what it was referred to. But when I found Paul Williams' book about Operation Gladio, I'm like, oh my God, I lived through the exposure of that and didn't. So you can live in a country, you can be in an institution and not know what is going on around you. And people need to understand that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that people don't actually realize is that the kind of control, which really goes to the point that you're making, you're living through it and you don't see it. Why? Because you think what they're doing is normal. That is, you've accepted their set of axioms. And, that is when you want to go back to the Fabian Society, go back to the assault on our culture at the beginning of the 20th century, which is obviously continued and accelerated. What you see is that they want to get inside people's minds in the sense that rather than looking at the world as human beings naturally do, as creative human beings who, you can see it with a child. You can see it with a child playing with blocks. What is that child actually doing when he plays with blocks? He's actually figuring out how the world works. You stack them up one way and they stay, and you stack them up another way, they're going to fall over. This is the child actually experimenting with the way the world works. And that's how the human mind should, is natural. That is, we're in a world that God created. It's a creative world. He gave us creativity so that we could understand it and, live in it and prove it and make it better and so on. What is it that the imperialists do? What is it that the empire does? And this goes back thousands of years. You can start with Aristotle, my least favorite philosopher, which basically says, no, you're not your creative mind. You're just your senses. You're no different than your pet dog. We're going to bombard your senses. We're going to manipulate your senses. We're going to immerse your senses. And if they can reduce people to just responding from the standpoint of their senses, then they don't have to put you in chains, because they've got you. So you can be in the middle of something like Operation Gladio or the overthrow, or frankly, for all those poor deranged people still in the United States who don't see that there was a coup carried out against the president of the United States. Why? Because they're in the mindset which has been created by these people, and this looks normal and natural to them. And they don't even understand how much they are controlled, and that's why that's why they're afraid of somebody like Donald Trump, outside the box, right? Completely creative, complete risk taker, could not profile this man, no matter what. And, it's sort of, it is the old, the little boy who stands up and says the emperor has no clothes. All of a sudden everybody says, oh yeah, I knew that.
And what's more outside of the system than anything than a higher power, God, the creator, that there is good and evil. You are made. That's far above the president. That's far above the CIA. And when you do that, that also kind of gives you the courage to go, and maybe they're wrong. Maybe the people telling me that we're just these stupid humans, we're inefficient, and we got to get in the pod and eat the bug, and you got to euthanize them, and you don't. you start to believe it if your higher power is the state. But if you
Right.
look beyond that, and not only that, it's a form of wonder, and wonder really what it means is a potential. Maybe there's more ways to put the blocks together, then you can step outside of it. And what you're saying is they can't create. That's why all the what is a sequel? What is making Helen of Troy a black woman? It's like this is all just you're taking something and you're putting something on it. You're a DJ doing a remix, but you're not making the original music. I truly believe that evil cannot create. It can control and pervert, and it can shave stuff off, but it can never just make something. I think that's the endowment of the creator. Is it really is. It's spoiler alert. It all comes down to good versus evil, but I think that's what this is. Is you can control, you can label, you can this, you can label that. You don't need $1 trillion in algorithms. What you can do is just make I don't know, a platform and go, yeah, maybe the best thing will just rise to the top. And it does.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And we
it's,
saw it in 2024. I
hmm
mean, everything they threw, I mean, not to mention trying to kill him, but
that too.
everything they threw at President Trump, and I'm here in, a purple bluish state, pins and needles, election night. We going to pull this off? We going to pull this off? And then when we started to see the votes coming in from the blue collar areas around Detroit, from the Muslim Americans in Dearborn and Hamtramck voting for President Trump, you sit there and I truly believe it was those votes in Wayne County that made it too big to rig.
Yeah.
We expected to win, Macomb County and these other counties, but when we saw the vote totals coming in Wayne, we said, okay, we just outflanked them. They're not even going to try. And they didn't. They called Michigan, early. I expected to be up all night again, like in 2020. But that was just this inherent response of human beings, whether it's a black auto worker, or a Yemen, restaurant owner. They said, no, I'm an American and I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. It just came out. It was not containable.
There was, and this always happens when I have the colonel on, and she's so well mannered that she'll sit and listen as I interrupt nonstop. But I heard a comedian say it, Ray Kump. He was like, "Here's the thing: if you had to do 100 year or 200 year march through the institutions, by definition, you're doing something that the vast majority of people hate. You got to go out of your way to start eating healthy. McDonald's they don't ever have to advertise again. I'm still going to gravitate towards there eventually because I'm a fat ass and I want a cheeseburger. Like, if you are doing something that takes this long and this meticulous, by definition, most people hate. So it's the inverse. By definition, most people, a black auto worker, a Yemeni restaurant owner, may it's pretty the vast majority of people are on the same page. Yeah, you kind of want the whole thing where we have jobs and there's a border and and the money works and we're not whatever nuking somewhere else. It's not, it really isn't rocket science.
So I think one other point that I want to make is the contagiousness of once the person is out of the matrix. So one of the most important things from my background in the military is there are a lot of I don't like the word brainwashed or groomed, but you are developed to be risk adverse. There's these, set hierarchies that certain things that you have to do to progress. And anyone that steps out of that and does something different has a shunning type effect on you. And I grew up outside of that bubble. I was not the typical officer because I was prior service. The fact that I made captain was just a thrill to me because I enlisted as an E1. And so I kind of watched this from outside of that. And I watched people, my own personal friends, that the higher in rank, the more conformity or the more conform to the norms they became, even though they weren't as maybe a captain or a major. And those institutional structures are very difficult to overcome until you have someone at the top that gravitates to outside the box thinking. And when I finally achieved the kind of the pinnacle for me was being a wing commander. And I was able to set up that kind of out of the box thinking and encourage it within my own organization. We rapidly changed everything. And watching that unfold in my own personal career is what leads me to have such enormous hope, not just for our military, but all of the institutions that we have in the government. If you look just at the Department of War with Pete Hegseth, he literally broke every norm. He isn't the good old guy that was being groomed for a military industrial complex job after he retires. He obviously, because of his rank, he had not been mentored at Harvard. He had not went to a war college to get that kind of sheep dipping with all of the appropriate mentors. And so in each and every case, Noam at the Department of Homeland Security, this brings outside influence into these stovepiped organizations, which is critical to basically kind of jump the shark, if you will. And those risk-taking people are going to change everything in such a much more accelerated fashion than picking someone that's from inside of that and has touched all of those different nodes that you need to in order to rise to the top. And I see that as a very hopeful thing for our future, because it literally has broken so many paradigms that, and you can tell I still have several friends that are on active duty. They're feeling that real change in their lives.
Yeah. Susan?
Well, yeah, and then sometimes you have the outside insiders or inside outsiders. I'm not sure which way to put that, like Scott Bessent, right? Here's somebody who comes from the inside, worked with George Soros, helped bring down the British pound. These are fairly sophisticated, insider operations, but that's not where his identity is. I mean, that's actually given him some tools to use.
Yes.
But his identity, is from that, I think is from that kid from South Carolina, that he talks about, growing up in a middle class, kind of environment, because he has come into Treasury. And, I don't know anything about the culture of Treasury, and I'm sure it's not quite as structured as the culture of the military, but I'm sure it was a similar kind of phenomenon. And the mission of the U.S. Treasury is now completely different than it was a year ago. The mission of the U.S. Treasury, and he said it when they put out the annual Financial Stability Oversight Committee report, the previous mission was to bail out the too big to fail banks. Mm-hmm. That is no longer the mission of the Treasury. It is the real economy and household incomes. Boom. So, I mean, if this administration is able to continue, which of course is going to cycle back to the question of the midterm elections, and how many of our fellow Americans work their way through the psyops? Again, and I keep coming back, especially inside the MAGA movement. I mean, I'm not wasting any brain cells on a Rashida Tlaib supporter. Okay, they are what they are. But what about the people inside our own movement? Who sit there and say, and I've had people do this on our live Q&As, I'm not going to vote until we get rid of machines. Well, that's like saying, I'm not going to fight until the enemy surrenders. I mean, give me a break. You've got to fight on whatever the battlefield is. I mean, maybe the president will go with an executive order. Maybe we will get significant election integrity changes. Maybe we will kick enough senators in the butt to get the Save America Act through. If we do, that changes the battlefield for us for the better. If we don't, you still fight to win.
You have to.
So I want to go back to your point about Bessent's insider. This is one of the things that I think people in general fail to grasp. If I'm on a battlefield, one of the key things that you try to do is co-opt one of the insiders on the other side for intelligence purposes.
Mhm.
So if you look at, and I will use President Trump's career, one of the things that made him the most lethal to the opposing party was his insider information, right? He grew up in that system. He grew up in the Hollywood system, which is totally corrupt, to include intelligence ties. He grew up in the New York mafia infested construction business. He was in the South Florida, which is totally mafia driven real estate. His purchase of the Resort International, which was a CIA front, his exposure to the casino industry, again, intelligence, CIA ties, made him. And I love the people that look at all of that and go, he's dirty.
Yeah.
Okay. But if you're going to change all of that, you are not going to change it without that inside information. That's what he brings to the table. He knows how they operate. He can be 10 steps down the road with that intelligence background that no one else has. I look at Bessett the same way.
I can't draw his name off the top of my head. There's a guy I've had on the show forever, years ago. He was an author about embassy construction and specifically Benghazi. And for a while he was the head of Stratfor. He said, and this is in the book he wrote, I think he wrote it right after Benghazi, but it was going back to the 90s. He's an intelligence guy. And he's like, I went and like got to know I met Donald Trump whatever in like the 90s or early 2000s and got to know as like head of security, and they brought me in for some like consulting or something. And he's like, and I went in there, I was getting to help him. And he goes, and I went in there, and not only did I have like no advice for them, he was like, I was floored because he was running his casino and personal security on par with our embassies. And he was like, at the very least, and I have no idea if he is a TDS guy or not, but the book was written long before Trump ran. He was like, that guy has got buttoned up private security. Like you, I always look back to that. I'm like, that's a guy that came in here with a pretty good understanding of whatever's going on. Like, that's how I always look at it. I'm like, he didn't come in here just blind and naive and just, I'm gonna run in there. There's some moves behind it.
Well, I had a funny reaction to Trump's first State of the Union in his first term because the Secret Service who came in the door before him, I took one look at him and I say, this is not a button-down career Secret Service guy. This must be an ex-New York cop.
Well, you
Because
brought in all his private security.
yeah, he just looked like an ex-New York cop.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do believe that. And then also to what you were saying, Susan, about, I also truly believe that, and this could be naivety. I'm always on the lookout for that. I also really do truly like people can change. And I know that it's a big asterisk. You have to be on the look, but I just know in my own life, like growing up Catholic, becoming a shithead atheist for years, and then coming back to Christ after the worst time in my life when I lost my older brother to suicide. People can, you can change. There's not always a what's the 5D chess. You might just have somebody, like you said, like, man, I'm not doing the right thing. And I know that's naive, and I'm very aware of that. I'm not by all means like forgive them all. That is also a possibility. There's a higher power. Like you can turn. You can be like, yeah, man, I grew up in this poor town. Maybe I'm hurting a lot of people that I grew up with and that my dad grew up with. And that does happen very rarely. And I'm very cautious to, be bleeding heart about it. But that is another thing that comes from the creator, in my opinion.
Yeah. And look, I think it's also the case. A lot of people would go along to get along because they saw no other pathway. They didn't have the singular courage of the kind of person who will break the matrix. But once you give them the opportunity to do so, you know, I mean, look at this cabinet. People keep saying Marco Rubio's a neocon. Well, honestly, how would Marco Rubio be functioning in a world without Donald Trump? Don't ask me. I have no idea. But in the world that's been created by Donald Trump, he's acting in a genius way, and he's acting in keeping with Trump's mission.
I'll I'll take, one of the thieves crucified next to Christ. Yeah, you can change. Hey man, you can. And it's, well, what would they do in this world? I don't know. But you can. And I don't think it's ever good to cower, but at the same time, rationally, you might go along to get along, especially if Kennedy's head was just blown off and then the assassin was shot. I I understand the hesitation of being like, shit. I get
No,
it. I get it.
yeah, I actually, one of my friends who I was with in California campaigning, I could sort of see how this person became that kind of psychologically broken person.
On a
And
human level, I get it.
yeah, and never came out of it, and would make decisions that they knew were wrong, but they basically, had decided it didn't matter if it's wrong. This is the world that I'm living in, and that's how I have to live my life. And it's very tragic.
And it is. I mean, I don't know this. I'm a 35-year-old single guy, but I would imagine that a lot plays into it. If you've got like three little toddlers at home, and you might be like, I can even see where maybe you're not wrong. Maybe you're like, all right, well, God is telling me to take care of my family. I get that too, and I'm not to divert it and pass judgment on that. That being said, you can also have people who maybe they did have that lapse in courage, and now they see it turning, and they're like, you know, all right, let's do this. I'm gonna clear my karmic balance. Like, let's do this thing. And I don't know, Colonel.
I think courage is contagious.
That
I've
too.
seen it personally in my organizations that I led. When and I hate I know how this sounds, but you kind of from the perspective of leadership, there are people who are self-starters that you basically just need to face in a direction and they're going to take the hill, right? You don't even really have to motivate them. You don't have to spend any time on them. You definitely have to reward them. But the preponderance of the people are, they need a leader. They need a lot of encouragement. And once they have that, they perform almost equally as well as the
Yeah.
self-starters, but they need that motivation. They need you to bring them in the office, kind of show the love, and that type of thing. And I think that's where we're at in this movement, as far as to your point about Rubio. Obviously, being a Floridian, I followed his career for a very long time when he was in our state house here. Totally was not a fan. Understand his position on amnesty and all that other stuff. But he is a product of the environment that he grew up in South Miami. That was kind of the way you got elected to office down there. And I think the longer and the higher he rose in office, he began seeing that there were, but to be safe, because his voting base was down there, he's not going to be one of those people that spoke out against the way, the environment was. But as soon as he ascended into the Secretary of State, it's like a light bulb went off. I mean, he is literally a different person. And to your point earlier, Susan, about the JD Vance and the Rubio, they play off of each other. It's almost like a good guy, bad guy kind of thing, where on one position, one of them will go out here and the other one will go over here. And I think that is, I've noticed in my research, this, and I mentioned it earlier, the whole strategy of tension and creating the chaos so that you can make order out of that chaos. It's almost like we've turned the tables on the people that did that for nefarious reasons. There's a certain amount of chaos that gets generated in each of these different, the Homeland Security with the, but you can see the order forming out of it that is much more positive. So it looks like this scattergram of these pockets of picking up all of these illegal, rapists and terrorists and stuff like that. But if you overlay that with the research that I've done in the terror networks and cells in the United States and the drug networking, the narco pieces, that's a perfect overlay of where these operations are going on. And if you're going to change the interior of the United States and transition us out of living in fear and having easy access to narcotics and stuff like that, you would not be doing anything any differently. It looks chaotic, but it is in a very controlled way.
Yeah, I mean, when you're breaking an old system, it's going to look messy,
Yes.
But if the intention is to do something better, which clearly it is the case with this administration, which is different from what we
Yes.
saw in the 60s and the 70s, where you break down a system which was adequate. I mean, we didn't have nirvana in the 50s and 60s, but people had a generally healthy outlook,
Yes.
and a positive, optimistic, pro-American outlook. They broke that down, but they did it, where you're sort of then thrown into this world of randomness, and then you just shrink into, I can't handle this any longer.
Yes.
I'm just going to retreat into myself and, be a contented cow or a cold herd, however you end up.
And you look at it kind of like the Phoenix program, where you burn it down to rebuild it in the global order.
Right.
That's not what's happening here. We are destroying their Phoenix program.
And Colonel, we're coming up on an hour. I just wanted to give you that if you gotta go. I can
Okay.
keep going though. It's that, and then I always kind of look at it as, and you'll know them by their fruits. It's just how I always.
Yes.
What is things can absolutely be chaotic, and you have to be on guard. Is blah blah blah. Is this a nefarious actor? Is this a good actor? Is this a good actor who's just stupid and actually doing bad things? I've learned that through the podcast of different people I've met over the years. It's always like you will know them by their. Some people are just outright, they're just awesome people. Other people, they're kind of asses, and then as time goes on, you realize you're like, oh, this is actually building me up, and this is all the good. You will know them by their fruits, and you really can't. You can hide that for a little while. Eventually, you can tell if a behavior is good for you or whatever. That's how I look at this. For all the flaws, and there are many, they're all human. Like, what are the fruits? Like, okay, long term, we're gonna bring back, reindustrialize. You're blowing up drug boats. I'm like, I'm like, I'll take it. If the whole thing is, are there crazy people? Sure, but it's more free speech. I'll take that. Like, are there going to be crazy people that latch on all the time? I'm like, what are the fruits of the crazy idea that we're going to bring back fabricating jobs here? Like, I don't. Well, that's just for the military, dude. Shut up and take the win. Like, that's how I look at it. Is like you will know them by their fruits. I'm like, these are all. There's more money in pockets, and it's also, well, how do you change things at a base level? You look at all the, like you said, Susan, we didn't know it wasn't Nirvana, but when you look at a bunch of towns all across the United States, and why are they all hollowed out? Well, they're all on fentanyl. Well, why are they on fentanyl? Well, other than the fact that it's coming in, okay. Well, why are they on heroin? Why are they doing? Well, because mom went into prostitution, or dad's a drunk. Well, why did that happen? And has it always been that way? Well, no, it's because they both had to work 4 jobs. Well, why are they both working 4 jobs? Well, the public schools suck. Well, what happened? Well, almost all of them, I can tell it's just from where some of my family is. You can almost always, to a date, go back to go. Well, that's when the mill left.
Right.
That's when you go. Well, it's just a job. Well, what is just a job? Dad's making money and mom's at home. 99% of things are downstream from. It's always
Right.
tell people, they're like, how do I build a podcast? I'm like, get sober, eat healthy, get 8 hours of sleep. Like, what are you talking about? I'm like, it'll all happen after that.
But I'll
That is
tell
what
you,
yeah.
it's not just a job for money, because I've used this example.
Self-respect, purpose, value.
Yeah, and it's your identity, because I always come back to this. In 2023, we went out to the UAW picket lines. And, we didn't know what kind of response I wrote a leaflet, Donald Trump's message to auto workers, on tariffs and, EVs. So the first auto plant we went to was out in the suburbs, 60, 65, 70% support for Trump. despite the leadership of the UAW. Then we said, all right, what's going to happen if we go to the Stellantis plant on East Jefferson in the middle of Detroit, where the workforce is largely going to be Black, Hispanic, and Muslim? Same response. Same response. Didn't matter. And also same response between women and men. And this is largely a Black workforce, and everyone knows, the place where Trump has probably the least support outside of suburban college-educated housewives, is a lot of Black women in the cities who've never had anything other than Uncle Sam, as their daddy. But not with the auto workers. Because if you're an auto worker, you're living in the real world. That you can't have an opinion about a machine. You have to know how that machine works. You're going to lose a hand, right? So these people who have productive identities, they made the right decision on their own. And that's one of the important things, I think, about bringing back manufacturing or engineering, science, things where you're farming. You can't have an opinion about when to plant. You have to plant when the universe tells you to plant, right? So you've got a different kind of identity. And as the jobs come back, we build out that middle of our society, which we've lost, where the average person has a sane, productive identity. They may not always vote the way that you vote, but by and large, they're going to end up, wanting the country to go in the same direction you do.
Well,
because they have skin in the game.
Well, not only that, what you just said is, building, that also comes from, it's building blocks as a kid.
Yeah.
You see how it worked. The thing that's helped me the most make this podcast was getting into medical school. It was 3 or 4 years of just unimaginable sacrifice and everyone calling me retarded. And I just kept working. And then it worked. And I went, oh my God, I was a meathead in high school with like a C average. And then I aced the MCAT. That helped the podcast more than no classes, no nothing. I was like, if I just genuinely work harder than everyone and just torture myself half to death. And now I look at it and go, and with the power of God, it'll work. So really, that's the other thing. It's like, yeah, people who have an opinion, you can't choose, well, maybe the dollar will just be more no matter how much we keep, printing. It's like, no, man, if you put your hand in the smelter, you're losing the hand.
Right.
Like, so other than the fact of self-respect, value, purpose, money, a strong home, it's also, interfacing with reality, right? And it's Voltaire, I think it was Voltaire, right? Those who can convince you of absurdities can make you commit atrocities. And that's kind of what we're seeing on that macrocosm level. If none of it's real, then vote for this, vote for that. It's all irrelevant. Right. So, but Colonel, I will let you go. We can keep going if you want, but I know you said an hour would be good. So, but we'll wrap it up. And for everybody listening, please go to the description, websites, Twitters, all that good stuff. Closing thoughts, either of you. Susan, you first.
Well, look, I think the theme of this is keep your head in reality. Look, and constantly judge what this administration says it's going to do with what it actually does and what the outcome is. I mean, my hair was on fire when, I woke up about midnight hammer. I said, oh, crap. Are we in another forever war? And then I said, wait a minute, let's just take a beat and see what happens.
Just give it a minute.
Right. And what happened is exactly what Donald Trump said was going to happen. No forever war, no boots on the ground, no perpetual war. So, just constantly, spend less time, in the social media universe and more time just looking at what they're saying and doing and judge it in the real world.
And I think what you said is constantly judge, including them. If it starts to seem like they're co-opted or had a change of heart or were nefarious from the start or are coerced or under duress, judge that. Don't take they're all human. Constantly make them earn it. And so, Colonel, thoughts?
So, I always caution people to stay at the 30,000 foot look. Do not go down to the nitty gritty because none of us have situational awareness or intelligence to function at that level. You have to look, to Susan's point, you have to put the things in context with what we do know. And also, Guard your emotions. If you are listening to someone say something that evokes immediate emotion, know that you are being psychologically manipulated. And they're perfectionist at doing that. And just, again, zoom back out, put it in context as a node on an entire timeline, but guard your emotions because they are psychologically manipulating people at an expert level in order to get people to do what they want as opposed to what's most beneficial to yourself.
The That's one thing I think the podcast has forced me to learn. We can all look back and remember things, and I think I'm remembering. I'm probably biased or nostalgically or whatever. Man, it's really hard to lie to yourself when there's video audio. So I'll look back, I'll be like, I was always on point. I look back at episodes of me in 2020, not just like things I was saying politically, but what I wanted out of life, the amount I was swearing, I look back at that and I'm like, oh, and it's like, well, you can't know what you don't know, and you're learning. It's like, well, what's one thing I've really learned over the years is if there's an immediate emotional self-righteousness, anger, give it a minute.
Yes.
Take two aspirin and calm them. Give it a minute. And maybe it
Yes.
is real and you need to act. Give it a minute. And I'm telling you
Yes.
that as somebody who's on video audio, you're just going to look so stupid and you can't even smudge it because it's there in high res. Yeah, that's me. So, I don't know, let your ego kick your ass. So we'll wrap it up. Both of you guys, thank you so much. I'll connect you guys on email. I would love to do it again. Thank you both so much for your time and everybody listening. Please go in the description, websites, Twitters, all that good stuff. Colonel, Miss Kokinda, thank you
Thank you.
both so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching, everybody. Thanks for watching. Three quick organizations that I try to help through the podcast. I don't take any money from, and I wouldn't if they offered. First and foremost is ARC, the Association for the Recovery of Children. That's led by Basil Baz. It's been around since 1993. They physically liberate sex trafficked children. They get about 10 to 12 kids a year. I've got a fundraiser thrown for them before. You can go to the link in the description. You can donate, I think, as little as $1. It's tax deductible. They are truly doing the Lord's work. This isn't an awareness campaign. This isn't wristbands. They physically go in, kick down doors, and liberate children who are raped daily. They're doing the Lord's work. If you can go help them, you can go give $1. You can also take their training programs and do your best to help spot human trafficking in the world around you. It really is. If there's anything that this podcast accomplishes on this earth, I think it should be to help them. The second group is Invest, like a vest, a bulletproof vest, led by Mike Letts. 25% of police precincts in the United States cannot afford to give and this is true, cannot afford to give their officers cars, weapons, nor vests. They cannot do that. And you can donate as little as $1. They have donated over, I believe, 70,000 bulletproof vests in 30 years. Actually, Invest and ARC were both founded in 1983. Fun fact. And Invest is also doing something that is dovetailing actually with ARC. I put them in touch. BAR, Broken Arrow Ranch, which is to make sure that the kids who are rescued don't fall right back into the trafficked system. So ARC, you can go in there and you can help them, and Invest, you can also go in there and help them. And lastly is the Church of the Barbarian Spirit. That's my buddy Clay Martin, Special Forces. It is a group to where Special Forces veterans are helping other Special Forces veterans in unconventional ways, be it fasting, be it psychedelics, be it just face-to-face talking to reduce suicide rates. And as you guys know, suicide is very near and dear to me. So those are three groups that I really think are actively trying to make the world a better place instead of just talking about it. If you guys could just go check them out, go share their links, go do whatever you can. If you can donate, go donate. If not, that's cool too. But, long after I'm dead and long after you guys are gone, I want the lasting impact of this podcast to be something that's genuinely helped the world. So if you guys can go check those out, that would be insanely appreciated. Thank you so much.